How did a young man who was once homeless end up becoming a fashion icon? This is the story of how a modest family business became one of the most recognizable names in the world, Louis Vuitton. In 1821, Louis Vuitton was born on his family's farm in France's remote Anche village. They did not have access to electricity or plumbing. Xavier, Louis's dad, was a miller and farmer, and Corinne, his mom, made hats on the side. Despite his apparent intelligence, Louis clearly had no formal education behind him, and since the closest school was located 6 miles away, it's assumed that he spent his entire childhood working on the family farm instead of learning to read and write. Louis would have to toil in the fields from nightfall until morning if he wanted to feed his family. In other words, the Vuittons were struggling financially, and Louis was born into a situation that didn't bode well for his prospects. The situation then rapidly deteriorated. Soon after Louis's mother died when he was only 10, his father remarried. Unfortunately, Louis's new stepmother was highly manipulative and controlling, and the two frequently butted heads. How could he move past the pain of his loss and his growing frustration with the situation? At 13, he ran away from home with plans to travel to Paris. Without a goodbye, he upped and left in the dead of night. The only catch was that Louis had neither food nor money, and Paris was 225 miles away. Therefore, he was relegated to using unpaved roads for his travels. When he found a new settlement, he'd do odd jobs for the villagers in exchange for food and money. But he needed more cash to pay for housing. He therefore persisted in spending his nights in the woods or wherever he could secure a place to do so. As Louis worked odd jobs, he often found himself in the company of skilled artisans who taught him their trades. His life would be drastically altered by his wide range of skills. At this pace, however, getting anywhere was a huge ordeal. 3 years passed before he finally made it to the City of Light. When Louis arrived in Paris, he quickly found work as an apprentice box maker and packer. Working in this field introduced him to many well-to-do people needing luxurious, bespoke travel bags. Louis stayed for many years, putting in his maximum effort to learn the trade. Yet Louis Vuitton had loftier goals for his future. After marrying at 33, Louis used his savings to open a box-making workshop in Paris and sell his own products. Louis had discovered a significant flaw in the luggage of the day. Each leather container had a domed lid to protect its contents from precipitation. The main problem was that the boxes couldn't be stacked, so the packers had to carry each one individually. When Louis started experimenting with different materials, he found that canvas was lighter, more durable, and more water-resistant than the traditional wood used for trunks, allowing him to make them with flat tops. Everything improved in efficiency as a result of being stacked in a pile and packed into multiple trunks at once. Louis's innovative new suitcase shape marked the beginning of the modern era. At this point in his life, Louis had already made his way to the upper crust of society. He established a solid reputation in his chosen field. Thus, his new luggage line was an immediate hit after its debut. To facilitate the sale of his wares, he published the Louis Vuitton catalog and began mailing it to prospective clients. After only 2 years on the market, his new suitcases had become a symbol of success and a necessity for the well-to-do. His company's name recognition had expanded internationally, and he was now fielding requests for shipment from all corners of the globe. In 1859, Louis's business had grown to the point where he could afford to hire skilled workers to assist with order fulfillment. He hired 20 people to work at the new workshop he opened just outside of Paris. During this time, train and boat travel popularity began to rise. Therefore, the pool of possible buyers multiplied. People from all socioeconomic backgrounds could now go on vacations. Top-of-the-line luggage was required by all classes of society. It looked like Louis had finally made it and was destined to be successful for the rest of his life. Sadly, this was not the case. War was on the horizon for France, and Louis Vuitton was about to suffer another devastating blow. Louis was 49 years old when the Franco-Prussian War began in 1870. Louis had to leave his house and seek refuge with thousands of other people in a makeshift shelter. He was worried for his life because he had run out of food. It was utterly gutted when Louis was allowed back into his store in 1871. There were broken windows and stolen machinery, and he had lost everything he had worked for. But he didn't give up and instead used his savings to start the company, promising it would be even more successful. Many people had been forced to leave their homes as a result of the fighting, and this meant that there were now many more empty storefronts available for lease in the city. Louis Vuitton took advantage of this by locating his new boutique in Paris's affluent and aristocratic section. The location couldn't have been more convenient, sitting as it did between the train station and the Grand Hotel, both frequented by weary travelers in need of new duffels. In 1872, he developed a new style: striped beige canvas suitcases. As a result, this trend skyrocketed in popularity, and people relished showing off their cutting-edge sense of fashion. Louis spent the last 20 years at this Parisian store before passing away at age 70, but his son George, who took over the family business, ensured his legacy would live on. So how then did the Vuitton family lose their dynasty? Stay tuned to find out. George aimed to take the company globally by opening a successful shop in London, among other locations. Many other manufacturers began producing imitations now that Louis Vuitton suitcases had achieved such fame. In 1896, Georges Vuitton added the now famous LV monogram, a measure that makes the brand's designs much harder to copy. He chose his father's initials, LV, in homage to the company's namesake. In addition, he had the inspired idea of putting a brand new, impossible-to-pick lock on the trunks. By 1900, the company had already amassed 100 workers, and its ranks continued to expand steadily. Following his death in 1936, Georges Vuitton left the business to his son, Gaston Louis. But Gaston took over the company at a challenging time, with war looming in France in a matter of years. Gaston was forced to close the Louis Vuitton factory when the war caused a cancellation of contracts. Gaston Vuitton realized that he needed Nazi Germany's help if he was going to keep his business afloat. Due to collaboration with the Nazi regime, Louis Vuitton maintained a glamorous ground-floor shopfront in the Hôtel du Parc throughout the occupation. In the meantime, several other labels had to shut down because they refused to work with the Nazis. Obviously, this part of the company's past caused a lot of shame. However, they might say that Gaston did what was necessary to save the business. Henry Rackemeyer, Gaston's son-in-law, took over Louis Vuitton after his death in 1970. But unlike his predecessors, Henry came to Louis Vuitton with a wealth of business experience from a previous venture, allowing him to take the company to new heights. Henry instituted several radical changes to make Louis Vuitton the multinational conglomerate that it is today. He shifted the focus of Louis Vuitton from wholesale to retail. By 1978, he had expanded to several other countries, including Japan. After adjusting for current inflation levels, sales grew from $20 million to $260 million over 6 years. Thus, in 1984, Henry chose to take the company public. All 1 million Louis Vuitton shares were sold at $63.63 apiece. Henry rode this wave of success and newfound wealth to launch additional global locations. In 1987, Louis Vuitton had already earned $1 billion in revenue. That success exceeded Louis's dream when he opened his Paris store. Henry also merged the business with a luxury beverage producer, Moet Hennessy, who specialized in champagne and cognac. Together, they formed LVMH, the world's largest luxury goods group. It stands to reason that if they joined forces, they could more efficiently use their resources, allowing them to expand even more rapidly. After the merger, Henry and the Moet Hennessy president did not get along. Henry needed help, so he contacted Bernard Arnault, a successful real estate developer that he knew. It would be a huge mistake to accept him as an investor. To advance his power within LVMH, Bernard made a covert purchase of 43% of Louis Vuitton shares and received backing from the Moet and Hennessy families. Henry was hurt by the betrayal of the man he had hired to help him, so he sued Bernard to force him to give up control of Louis Vuitton. The courts, however, came to side with Bernard. After his friend's betrayal, Henry became so enraged that he quit Louis Vuitton permanently. No one in the Vuitton family was associated with the brand for the first time in nearly a century. Louis Vuitton sales dropped precipitously after Bernard's hostile takeover, and the brand was no longer being covered by the media. However, Bernard understood how to restore success to the business. By teaming up with multiple designers for its Centennial collection, Louis Vuitton was able to make a comeback. Designers like Vivienne Westwood and Isaac Mizrahi have put their own spin on the timeless LV monogram. Everyone wanted a Louis Vuitton bag because they had never seen anything like it. Bernard's initial investment in Louis Vuitton was successful and yielded substantial returns. Currently, he is LVMH's chairman and chief executive officer. With a fortune of over $180 billion, Forbes magazine recognized him as the wealthiest person on earth in 2021. While his rank on the Forbes 400 fluctuates with the ups and downs of the stock market, he is consistently one of the top 5 wealthiest people in the world. Bernard has a reputation for being so ruthless in business that he's called the Wolf in Cashmere. This reputation is mainly responsible for the fact that LVMH now owns over 70 different brands. Many of the most illustrious names in the business are owned by this company. Louis Vuitton grew as a company in the modern era thanks to the introduction of bright, trendy designs favored by a younger demographic. It integrated new product categories including watches, jewelry, and sunglasses. They have the highest value clothing label in the world at $39 billion and more than 400 stores in 98 countries, making it accessible in almost every major metropolis. Many still look up to the rich and famous for fashion inspiration, and Louis Vuitton remains a highly desirable label. But I'd like to hear your opinion on Louis Vuitton. What did you find most interesting about his past? Leave a comment below and then check out the following video, which explains how Crocs became a billion-dollar company from selling ugly shoes.